Hey there, Squirrel Army! How's it going? For today, we are discussing cards that allow you to play and cast spells from the top of your library and why they are so good and so powerful. You can join the Squirrel Army by subscribing. Alright, so there's a lot of these cards. Most of them, I think, are actually in green, or most of the really good ones that I can kind of think of off the top of my head are in green. Certainly there's Bolas Citadel as well, so that's in black. There's a couple ones that are sort of specific to, like, a certain permanent type or a certain creature type or whatever, like Descendant's Path. You reveal the top card of your library. If it's a creature card that shows a type of creature that you control, you may cast that card without paying its cost. Otherwise, you put it at the bottom of your library, which is not the same thing, but again, it's sort of that sort of similar-ish sort of card advantage that we like to sort of see in sort of certain cards like this. But it is an enchantment, so that can be good and can be bad. So, you know, it is what it is. There's, like, one of the best ones is obviously just like Augur of Autumn, because it lets you play lands and lets you cast creatures. And again, you do need that Coven going, but Coven's super easy to get going for the most part, so you don't really need to look at getting that going too hard, because you're going to get it pretty darn easily. There's a few other ones that are out there and whatnot that are pretty darn decent. I used to think Ranger class was pretty decent. I mean, if you're in mono green or something that has pretty bad card advantage, I feel like it's not too bad. It's not the best, but not the worst. It's a lot of mana to invest to get to the point where you can actually start casting creatures. Like, its other abilities aren't terrible, but they don't really amount to a whole lot most of the time. Realm Walk is pretty darn decent, especially if you have one type or another that sort of dominates your deck for the most part. Even if you're not fully tribal, it still can be pretty darn decent if you have at least some amount of a very specific type. So yeah, that can be quite good. Vivien Monsters Advocate's pretty darn decent as well. It is a Planeswalker, so it does need protecting, but it does make its own blockers, so that's pretty darn decent as well. Vizier of the Menagerie is pretty darn decent as well. Like, again, like I said, a lot of these are creatures or in green, because green cares about, like, card advantage, apparently. So it's one of those funny things about some of these effects. But again, there are some things that are of other colors, certainly. Though, again, some are more limited to, say, instant and sorceries. There are some that are certainly instant and sorceries as well, like Amanitu's Augury. But I don't really like those sorts of ones. Like, I know some people do play, like, some of them and whatnot, or some of those sorts of effects, but a lot of those ones aren't that amazing for the most part. So yeah, but still, they can be good. There's some that are, like, with your Planeswalker, like Chandra, where you just exile the top card and you can cast it. I don't really like those ones that much either, because, again, unless you sort of already know what's on top, and you do know that you have enough mana to sort of cast those spells, a lot of the time you just get them exiled and never be able to play them again. So that is often a problem. That's the same problem with, like, Commander Leah Porter and a couple other cards that are like that. A lot of time, even if you get that mana discount, you still find yourself going, well, I can only maybe cast one of these spells, unless you're really a very low mana investment deck, and then you're kind of not really getting that far because you're not, getting that many triggers or whatever. So yeah, it's that tough balance to get enough cards to really warrant um, doing something like that. Same with like Dream Pillager and the things like that, like or Itali's actually pretty darn decent because it does cast it for free for you and whatnot. But again, I'm always not a huge fan of that card, but that's just me. Um, like the new Jajero and Hazoret, that one's not too bad either. But again, I'm not a huge fan of that, like exiling card advantage because again, it can be a little bit rough. Experimental Frenzy, I thought used to be pretty darn good, but I always forget that you have to essentially exile your hand, or basically you can't play your hand. So you might as well just put your hand underneath this thing and forget you have a hand because yeah, you can't do anything. One of the like original cards is like Future Sight. I think they've actually come around with a few other more Future Sight style of effects and whatnot, but still, that's all right. And that so. Um, what else do we have? I'm trying to think of all the ones. There's some that are. There's that one that's the snowman, the Yeti, that lets you cast snow permanents and play snow lands and whatnot. That one's kind of a little. That one's a kind of a little bit restricted, but again, that's pretty darn decent, honestly. If you're in the right deck, there's the one that deals with dragons, and that. So that one's pretty decent for a deck that cares about dragons and that. So yeah, there's a few that are out there, like there's Nyala Denise, who cares about party members. Um, there's a few other ones like that, but yeah, those would be the main ones. Actually, one with the multiverse is out there as well. Precognition Field. There's a few others, like I say. I don't want to go through every single one, but I wanted to go through at least a few of them and say, oh yeah, this exists and that exists and whatnot, and things like that. Actually, the new Sagada is actually pretty darn decent as well. Sagada Font of Blessings. I just remember that one. It does only get angels and humans, but again, that's still pretty good. Gives your whole team hexproof, so that's pretty darn decent. The reality chip's not a bad one either, though you do have to equip it, and that is another hoop that you kind of have to go through, so it is a little bit more of an investment to another degree as well, but still, there's a few other ones, like I sort of say, but I don't want to go through too much here, but the main point here is why are these so good, or why are these so played? Well, because essentially, for the main reason that you don't need a board state for them to work, for them to do the thing. You're not reliant on your Beast Whisperer or whatever or whatnot, sort of sitting there and sort of you have to play out your stuff on from your hand more, so you've got to actually have things in hand for Beast Whisperer or whatever in a lot of scenarios, unless you've got some of these cards that actually let you play off the top of your library. Because once you have access to your library, well, then you've got access to way more cards, and that's the second point. It just gives you access to way more cards. Now, yes, a lot of the time you're not going to be able to cast absolutely everything, and you do get stuck sometimes when you hit 2 or 3 lands in a row or whatever else, things like that. But again, it is a very useful effect for the most part because, again, you've got access to your entire library, and if you can cast enough things from your library, you often draw essentially 3 or 4 cards sometimes in a row. So you can get really good luck with it as well. You can get bad luck, obviously, but you can also get really good luck sometimes with it. So it can really chain off really easily. Now, obviously, with like something like Bowler's Citadel or something like that, you can cast any permanent, not just creatures or whatever else. You can do that whole thing where you put what's the name? What's it called? Um, ah, the Sensei's Top in your deck and Aetherflux Reservoir or something like that, and basically just draw your entire deck and just like lose no life essentially, and even gain life. So again, that's a very powerful effect, but again, it's not the like ultimate effect, obviously. But again, it is a very powerful effect. But it's not going to win you the game on itself. But it's again like you can draw your entire deck, and you can probably shoot some people pretty darn easily. So again, it's a very easily way to at least take out one person. And you're probably going to have enough cards in hand from this whole thing to probably kill the other two people pretty darn easily. So again, it's very powerful, and it probably means that you do just win the game. But again, it doesn't actually say that. It's like a bit more of a process that you actually have to kind of go through and whatnot. And you do have to have the right amount of things kind of set up to actually make it work and whatnot, for people not to interrupt that whole plan and that whole strategy and whatnot. But anyway, still, the ability that you can access your library is just so underrated, because again, now your hand is your library, and yes, it might only be the top card of your library in one sense, but again, that's still really good. It gives you access to another card that you can cast at any time, that you essentially can cast that card for the most part. So again, that's just so super powerful. So it's a super powerful variant of card draw and card advantage. And I would say that it is more so card advantage, it's not card draw. But that's the thing, like, again, like, you do need this sort of an effect, I think, and I do think it's one of the better sorts of effects, because you don't really need to rely on having something in your hand as much. Yes, in a sense, again, you're at the whims of more randomness in your deck, in a sense, but again, in another sense, you're not, because again, your deck is much more homogenized for the most part, or is likely to be more homogenized than your hand a lot of the time. So if you don't have something in your hand, you're sort of a little bit more likely to get it in your deck. It's one of those funny things. Like, if you have 10 mana dorks in your deck, like, again, it's like, okay, I don't have a mana dork in my hand. Well, actually, the chances of me finding a mana dork in my deck are now even higher, because, again, it's not in my hand. So the likelihood of me finding it in my deck is going to be much higher. And again, even if I, perhaps don't find that mana dork, I'm still going to be able to, plan around what I am doing. And that's another effect. That's why people say scrying and whatnot is so good, because it allows you to make forward plans and go, okay, I have this instant on the top of my deck or whatever. So I can work around playing that instant, like if I have Bolas Citadel or something, whatever else, that I can cast it with. So I can literally kill my opponent's creature or something or whatever by paying life or by paying something else, rather than having to pay mana for this spell. Or even if I do have to pay mana, it's not in my hand. So I've got, again, access to more cards. And again, if I find another instant or something else after that on the top of my library, and I still have the mana or the life or whatever else, other resource that I need to cast it, hey, well, why not? Maybe I'll, get something else out of it. So it still could be netting you more card effects on other people's turns. So it does depend if you have a lot of flash on some things, especially along the permanents that you're sort of most playing. Like if you're playing creatures mostly, or I shouldn't say permanents, but the sort types of cards that you're playing. If you're more playing instants anyway, it's probably not that important that you need to have flash, but again, it might be well worth it in some cases that you are playing mostly sorcery speed effects that you now want to play at flash speed. So yeah, there's that also. So that does help out with some of those other effects. So that is worth keeping in mind. But anyway, again, there's just a bevy of other reasons that really make this effect really, really good. So it's just one of those effects that I do now, you know, push myself to put into my decks because, again, yes, there are a lot of effects that draw you cards, and you do need those card draw effects as well. You can't just go without them. I'm not saying that, but these effects are so good because, again, it just gives you access to that library that you have. You know, again, when you're missing your land drops, again, you're kind of more likely to see it on the top of your deck for the most part a lot of times than not, even when you get to turn 6 or 7 or whatever it is when you drop your Bowl of Citadel. All that seems to happen a lot of the time is, oh, what's that? I got 2 lands. Wow, I can't do jack shit. You know, it's funny how that works, and yet people go, oh man, you know, like, what's going on? You know, why am I not getting my lands? Well, if you actually had access to your library, because you're not getting access to your lands, it would be more likely to hit lands because, again, your deck is much fuller of lands than what your hand obviously is. But again, you're more likely to see those lands in there because there's a higher concentration of lands in your deck, or a higher concentration of mana rocks, higher concentration of mana dorks, whatever else it is that you've got in your deck. You're going to have a higher concentration of those in your deck than what's in your hand for the most part. Because again, you can find 2 or 3 of those effects off the top of your library pretty easily, whereas in your hand, you've only got access to those 7 cards or whatever it is that you've got in your hand at the time. So again, it's often well worth it to, you know, play things from the top of your library like that because, again, you've got access to just way more cards. So it really opens up the gates for you. And I don't think that this is something that, again, is that major of a thing. And I don't think, like, again, card draw effects for the most part are a target, in my opinion. That's just me. I get that some people prioritize taking other people's card draw away from them so that, you know, they can't get too far ahead or whatnot. And certainly there are some effects that are out there, like Rhystic Study and some other things like that, that are just very annoying and just, like, very difficult to keep up with, especially when somebody has, you know, Smothering Tithe and some other stuff, or Rhystic Buddy, or, you know, Mystic Remora or anything like that. They have all those sorts of effects just jammed in there or whatnot. So again, it can be very difficult to keep up with those sorts of things rather than, you know, just, you know, like this whole thing. It's one of those things that, yeah, you've got to have the mana, but again, at least you get to play your thing sort of in a sense as well. You're not drawing that card. No, it's not in your hand, but again, you know, you're still being able to play it, which means that you're getting that advantage. So it's really quite powerful, especially the lower cost ones, because again, the less you have to pay for a lot of these sorts of effects, the more you can sort of be able to cast other effects and whatnot. Because again, you don't want to sit there and go, oh, cool, now I can't cast anything else because, you know, I just blew all my mana casting this. But again, that does happen sometimes, and you've just got to live with it. But again, at least you might be able to go, okay, cool. Well, I know what my next card is, so I can play around what that is. And then when you go to your draw step or whatnot, you can then look at the next card and then be able to plan around what that is as well. So it might be able to really help you out by, you know, it being a mana dork or being something else that, you know, or being a land that you still need or whatever else it is. So it's just one of those things that you shouldn't underestimate this sort of an effect, because I think it's severely underrated. I don't see that many people playing these style of effects. that much. Not like no one does, but I don't think they're played as much as your like Beast Whisperers and things like that or whatnot. But again, they are super, super good. Like Bola Citadel's obviously played a lot more, but again, like I don't see many people running Vivian Monsters Advocate or Vizier of the Menagerie or whatever, things like this. And they certainly are super duper good. And I think people should play them more. So, hey, guys, go and pick up yourself some of these cards, pick up yourself an Augur of Autumn, and things like that, or try some of these other effects that will give you this style of card advantage. Because if you're building from a precon, or if you're building a deck from scratch or whatever else it is, you need card advantage and card draw. So it's just one of those things that you should always look for cards like this that work with what you're trying to do. And yes, you need to find those cards and say, okay, I'm playing artifacts, or I'm playing enchantments, or I'm playing, instants of sorceries, or whatever else it is that you're doing. I'm playing planeswalkers, whatever else it is. So again, you need to hone in on the cards that, you can reliably get something off of. And there's not a huge amount of them, but again, there is some of them. So again, you can find those for your strategy and get some good, really great, good value off of them. So, yeah. But anyway, guys, you guys can always let me know what you guys think of this one. Write your thoughts down there in the comments below. Hope you've enjoyed this one, and hope you will join me again in the next one.